So good morning. First of all, to those joining and watching, thanks for dropping by. So this is one of the first Rebuild Local sessions that we're doing as part of a series over the next number of weeks. Some of the events, we're starting with the leader series and then going into the local series. But this morning, we have the lovely Rosa that's joining us. And perhaps just to kick it off, I'll give a quick overview for those if people are watching for the first time and they're wondering what is this Rebuild Local thing. So basically, Rebuild Local is an initiative that us folks from Yard created as a way to support local technical communities, the kind of rebirth and the rebuilding of that. So it's a mechanism that we're going to each local technical community, as many as we can, and we're kind of doing some of that hand holding. And we thought we were speaking to a lot of these people, so why not get them together, get them talking, and try to package some of those kind of learnings around kind of best practices and tools, so that they're a little bit better prepared when things get back to some kind of normality. But that's the Rebuild Local side. So my name is Neill, Gernon. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Yard. We're the creators of Rebuild Local. And for years, I've been building technical communities, both the UK and Ireland, totally accidentally, in both information security and then in machine learning. And this morning's guest is Rosa Langhammer. Rosa, could you give us a bit of an intro?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Neill. It was great. So I'm Rosa. At the moment, I'm the head of talent experience at a company called Andela, which actually started 7 years ago as a kind of learning company, upskilling software developers in Nigeria, and has transitioned to more of a tech talent network. Mm-hmm. And so my job is really to make sure that end to end, our experience for developers that join the network is amazing and excellent. And so prior to working for Andela, I was a digital consultant, but also quite notably, and the reason that we kind of know each other is that I was leading CoderDojo, which is a global movement of free coding clubs for young people all over the world.
Nice. Yeah, so it's before we got a call, we were kind of texting each other. I know it's early morning, so I have my mug ready. I'm all coffee.
Yeah, I'll be bringing mine in. Don't worry.
And I have some of my notes, and I find it really interesting. Your background from the community side, or from the talent and developer side, or technical talent and developer side, is really interesting. And I think it's one of the things that we think about is the non-typical categories, right? So outside a developer or a technologist, the fringe categories, whether it's kids, whether it's minorities or diverse groups, and so yeah, you've kind of had that kind of career transition, to really interesting companies. So it would be, I'm dying to ask a couple of questions on the transition, but first of all, maybe you were with Coder Dojo, from Raspberry Pi Foundation for years. It'd be really interesting just to hear an overview of how you ended up there and what is it that you actually did within Coder Dojo and how it maybe changed over the years.
Yeah. So I joined Coder Dojo 2014. I was fresh out of college, had just been doing kind of the startup thing in the incubator in Trinity called Launchbox. And went into Coder Dojo. We were 5-6 people in Dogpatch Labs before it was in CHQ. And really we were doing a melee of things. So we were supporting heavily in the Irish community in terms of where Coder Dojo had started. It started in Cork a couple of years before that. And then the actual foundation was founded after the movement had begun. So the community really drove Coder Dojo initially. And then the foundation kind of took root and was like, how do we answer the emails of all these people around the world who want to start Coder Dojos? How do we maybe create some content around it? And so when I joined, it was really, we were in those early stages of how do we put down some pillars of support and structure around this community? Introduce, I think when I first joined, we were just introducing a standard code of conduct for all the communities. That was kind of baseline that we were at. So then I was there for about 6 years, held multiple roles across community, product management, operations, kind of everything and all whenever you're kind of startup, and finally ended up at leading kind of the head of CoderDojo. So my team mainly was responsible for like growing the movement. So looking for, I guess, like mainly technical volunteers or also educators who had a real interest in tech to start CoderDojos in their local communities. And we did that through partnerships with other organizations. We partnered with local groups around the world, whether they were like co-working spaces who ran incubators and wanted to do more outreach to the younger generation. Sometimes that was education kind of companies who wanted to get out into the community and start teaching programming but didn't really know where to start. And so we did a lot of that. We also worked a lot on retention. So how do we keep all these clubs around the world like active, alive, and I think that's something, as I was leaving CoderDojo just kind of mid-pandemic, something that's really difficult because CoderDojo was very rooted in person and had to kind of make this shift to how do we do online, and we had a lot of our communities kind of starting with our Japanese community, for example, like creating their own guides, like here's the best practices when we were all in that early stages of the transition to online. And so that was really, really interesting as well, how the community started to lead with those efforts as they were trialing it out.
So that was very much like pushed by, they kind of observed, like at what point do you hands off or get hands off with support on something as new as that when you guys are the foundation, but like it's probably question marks, you're probably trying to figure that stuff out yourself, whilst the community is taking over and building like they actually built a kind of a playbook, if you like, a best practice kind of documentation. And
yeah, exactly. So and I think it's about a balance, right? It's like, how much do you lay out yourselves or do you work around it? And as we were all in different, I think every part of the world at that early stage was in such a different part of the cycle. And so some people were able to like spring things up online really easily. Other people were like, my broadband is rubbish, so like there's no way, our kids don't have connectivity. So there was all these different scenarios that we had to start thinking about. And I think it was always great to have community input into what does this look like? How does it feel? How can people run it? Like sharing actual experiences. And when, we were running our own dojos as well, but like, I think having that community input to those guidelines is always really, really important for sure.
My point being, the transition into Andela, it's very much the same, right? So you have as a business, perhaps you can give us a recap on that, and as a learning and a jobs platform / marketplace, how community is used at Andela. Because for me, from the outside, my perspective on Andela, I've known it for quite a while, and I always perceived it as a community that it was a community first. I always perceived it as a community, as Andela were growing community. Is that the case, or how has it changed?
Yeah, and I think that's definitely the case. I would say so. Yeah, Andela started around 7 years ago, with mainly the idea that like Jeremy, who's one of the co-founders, and they had 5 other co-founders, saw this opportunity for accelerating learning within, I guess, technical learning specifically within developers. And they started a pilot in Nigeria and got overwhelming responses to that. So, they were like, let's throw out this thing and see if anyone wants to be a software engineer. Not really sure, don't know. And literally it was like, there was so many people who were like, yeah, I'll totally like do training and see where it goes. And Andela really grew from there. And it has had like a little bit of a journey in terms of like trying to find like, obviously the software engineering market has changed quite a bit over that time. There's been a lot of boot camps entering the market from the US, training also like junior developers, and but also the tech ecosystem in Africa generally, as kind of Andela grew to a couple of countries, has actually also grown significantly, and Andela turned our focus a little bit more to mid and senior level developers. Additionally, obviously, like the kind of impetus of COVID has been a big impact there too, right? Because what Andela do is we will, bring in developers to the talent network, and then we match them with clients. And very often the clients are like, we have a big client in Dublin, we have a lot of clients in the US. And so the shift to remote work has really accelerated the pace that people are happy to like integrate people from various countries into their team. And so that's been a really, really positive thing for Andela, right? Because people have already got over the barriers of like, how do I have people like working remotely from their homes? How do we collaborate together? What tools do we need to use? Like,
so just on that one, like that's really interesting to me, right? Like, so I can see Andela is this bridge, right? So you have a distributed network of people across a region connected to a company, but you talk about that remote work and that regional stuff for that local, wherever a developer is located. Is there any mechanisms that Andela puts in place in order to help those developers support each other and interact with each other from a community perspective? Is there certain tools that you guys use?
Yeah, so we are extremely Slack heavy. I can hear your pings in the background there, Neill. but yeah, we utilize Slack a lot, right? For community. It's not actually a community built tool, so it's something definitely like we're gonna have to figure out as the network continues to scale. We originally, Andela did have offices, so actually a lot of Andelans are connected really through the offices initially. And so since I've come in March, what we've been trying to do is build out this kind of like, I guess, like community programming at a better scale. So having local champions who really, own like running events there. So essentially chapters, right? And then also skill-based as well. So we have, we want people to be able to connect across country. If they're iOS developers, that they can connect with fellow iOS developers, whether they're in Nairobi or in like Rio. It doesn't really matter. And I think that's the kind of stuff that that we're really focusing on, is like, how do we build this kind of peer-led community as well, and having that support each other, not only just to find jobs and improve their career prospects. I think that kind of networking is really important, but also like for a social thing, like in the world of working remotely, you need to have a sense of belonging with where you are working. And I think Andela has been that for many developers over the years. And that's what we want to create with community as well. So it's not just the kind of focus on outcomes and careers. It's also that like sense of belonging and social, like I'm able to connect, and you ask any of our developers and they're like, oh, it's amazing. Like I get to work with so many people across the world and I have these great relationships, and so many of them have become friends. I have two women in mind in Egypt who told me, they were like, we're best friends. We became best friends because of Andela. And you're like, really? That's kind of like, that's what it's about,
Yeah, I think that's like missing, right? So if you take, and what regions are they? Just really quickly, I saw they branched out, or is it?
So Andela's now global. Initially we had like 6 offices, but started when we've made that transition to a proper talent network and marketplace, we have opened up, and so now there's people from 80 countries in the talent network, which is really amazing.
One of the things that we're thinking about is just the more so your stereotypical local technical communities, perhaps around Europe or the States. And that's one of the things that we saw like hugely, just the peer stuff. It's sometimes, the purpose or the motive to get involved or to be within a community can often be like career related. That it could be whether you're talking about as you said, a couple of the African regions, or whether it's London, or it's kind of the same motives. It's for content in order to accelerate your learning and stay ahead and search for career opportunities. But peers, like the peer-to-peer stuff, I think has been hugely missed. We found that a lot, and a lot of it's kind of different from a thorough peer-to-peer community like what you talk about. But a lot of the enablers, if you notice, whether it's in, where we used to be based in Dublin, through to London or over in the States, a lot of them are enabled by the supporters or the enablers, the organizers, right? And so they kind of packed it in. We found a lot of them just like basically packed it in during COVID. A lot of them just stayed kind of static waiting. Is this remote thing going to pass? Because what I used to do as a local technical community organizer, right? You're like, you're kind of looking to contribute, and once you go online, you're like kind of using the Zoom and the YouTubes and the meetups. So yeah, that's something that we're thinking about a lot.
Yeah, I think you have that right in like every community and cross communities. The same people run most of the things, right? Yeah. And so like that was certainly something that I saw a lot at CoderDojo. Like the person who ran the CoderDojo also contributed to like other things in their local community, whether it was like parent teacher association stuff or like everything, and they were kind of going through that. And then you can also, now I've moved to Andela, it's the exact same thing. I jumped on a call with someone and they were like, hey, I actually used to run a CoderDojo. And I was like, well, that's really cool. So like, it's like these two worlds coming in together. But I think that's always something. It's like, I think something that's changed a lot in the past couple of years is definitely people trying to, understand how do you pass the baton correctly. And I don't think it's something that we have figured out as maybe community leaders yet, like how to do that transition up front. And so whenever I'm almost building community programs, a lot of the time I'm thinking about like, how do you actually do that? How do you do it in a sustainable way? How do you retain the groups without having the same person burn out or like have, kind of continue along that road? But yeah, you're dead right. I think that's a big thing for sure. And over the pandemic has been a harder thing to carry.
So what would you just be on that burnout? Now, that's a common one. We were talking about this the other day, just on any of the enablers for like local events typically, or just like if you're doing a bit more, so maybe separate to a meetup, maybe you're running actually a more consistent community or even conferences and stuff. And some of that burnout is real, right? Like it's the kind of bumpiness in an annual agenda we find comes from people who are just like, I just got a bit busy this month and I have to organize, if you're in Dublin, you're in the dog patches of the world, you have to organize your speakers as well and your sponsors, and then you have to organize the venue and the slot. What are some of the, you just said some of the burnout, excuse me, what are some of the headaches and challenges that you guys have seen, whether it's pre-COVID or like right now, whether it's on the peer side or the enabler of somebody organizing side?
Yeah, so I think right on the organizer side, we'll start there. I think one of the things is to be able to define your value proposition super easily, like both for attendees and then also for sponsors, right? Because I think one of the biggest headaches, at least that like time and time again, we'd be running events, you'd be doing these, even like it's especially for CoderDojo is like the bigger events, you're trying to find sponsorship and fundraising and articulate that value to people. And every year that was getting more and more difficult, right? And there's a lot of people in that space. And so I think it is something that has become clearer for event organizers and you get more visibility right now with a lot of the tools that you mentioned before. You can put your event on like all these different places. So I think that's one thing to try and get that and start thinking. Also just like continuing to think small was one of the things that and that's a really inverse thing, but for CoderDojo, people would be like trying to do these huge things and they're volunteers and they've like their family life and your work life and everything. And actually people get as much enjoyment out of like renting, not even renting, like getting a free hall in a local school or wherever and buying pizza rather than like all these bells and whistles of like, oh, I gotta give people goodie bags. And I think everyone kind of raises, and so it's raising expectations and bringing those back down for people, I would say is like one of the big things. And I think that's been the difficult thing, I think, with virtual events in some ways too. And also making that shift into hybrid, right? I'm part of a couple of community forums and it's like, how are we going to do this? It feels overwhelming. But I think if people just start like, here's where we're going to start where we are and we're going to just do it. And if we run it once, then we'll learn some stuff and then we'll just bring that to the next one. I think that kind of attitude and mentality can go a long way in terms of like helping figure that out.
I was just going into that as like, how are you thinking about actually approaching those? Well, you kind of just answered there, approaching some of those challenges, like multiple regions, and you touched on hybrid. What are the conversations you guys have had internally or through as you mentioned your community network? Is it just that like start slowly and kind of kind of learn along the way, or is there separate to like is there a hierarchy or a prioritization of high value stuff and low peer-to-peer community stuff, and a difference in how you're thinking to manage that stuff?
Yeah, so I think I think it's more around so having that balance of like, to me, the peer-to-peer like really ramps up, and we have our own events as well. Like we have tomorrow I have our monthly town hall, which is also super important. I think it's a flywheel in itself, right? Because we don't have the peer-to-peer stuff, then like attendance at general events and like contribution to that, not only attendance, but like what I really want to create is a place where people can kind of throw stuff at the wall. We can like kind of unconference a little bit of those like standing meetings, that kind of stuff. And I think so that's super important. Where we are with like the peer-to-peer things is like some people are able to host in-person events right now, which is amazing. And so that's something that we're kind of just leaving that decision up to local organizers and chapters. And I think that's potentially the only thing that we can do at the moment, because we're not going to be able to get in depth into all these countries, figure out what the thing is. Everyone kind of knows where their country is at in terms of like what the regulations are and how comfortable people are. But we are saying like for things that can be virtual, let's do that, especially stuff around like tech talks and like we want to try and like, you can get great speakers if you remain virtual, right? The accessibility of those things are amazing. Like we can ask people to come and hop in, and for like 30 minutes, they can like talk about something really interesting to our community that we might not have got in person. And so I think that is also like super valuable. And I think it's something that will continue beyond COVID, beyond all of this. I think that idea of like, actually, it won't be strange if you just hosted an event virtually because you want to have an excellent lineup. You want to like, really add value to people's knowledge and learning and networking in a different way. So I think that's the kind of direction that we'll be going. We'll definitely be taking things out of this era of virtual events and stuff. But also noting that like people need to build relationships in person as well. And that sense of belonging, as I said, is a big pillar for us.
It seems like people are quite kind of frothing at the mouth for it. They're kind of like just starved of interaction, and probably not starved of like, your average kind of cheap Domino's pizza you get at typical events, but like just the kind of gathering of people, just for the social aspects. The talks might be kind of interesting, but we're kind of seeing the same. I have a few last questions before we kind of wrap up. One of them is, you kind of touched on it with the peer-to-peer stuff and then your own events. And I find it interesting. So Andela is like going bigger, going wider across the globe. How are you guys thinking about how you create communities versus how you connect to communities, if that makes sense? Whether everything is Andela. We're speaking to a lot of companies now that might have a community strategy where it's internal. Some companies are strictly external, so connecting to communities, and some are kind of 50-50 depending on maybe a different desired objective, whether it be hiring or whether it be like developer relations, which is closer tied to maybe education. How are you guys thinking about that, connecting or creating?
Yeah, pretty 50-50 at Andela actually. So my primary focus is the kind of talent network, internal like communities. How do we build that, the peer-to-peer stuff? But we also have, and we use that kind of building of relationships to actually find out where are the places that these developers are living outside of Andela. How can we support their local organizations? How can we reach out to more people like those people who are in our talent network? How can we kind of expand and find more people to join Andela? And so it's definitely a combination, and things like one of the strategies we'll be working with partners in terms of like people who are running events. We were, sponsors of Go for Cod in Europe. And again, this is the kind of like accessibility piece, right? Is like, it's a little bit easier to actually get involved in communities, external communities now as well, because you can kind of like, you can see them online, you can join online. I think the things that still need to be worked out is like, how do you have a lot of these tools have like drop-in event booths and stuff like that.
Okay,
That's just not the same as like being in person, right? And
Yeah,
talking to someone and
Yeah,
it's really hard, but I think what's really good is like we've been able to like have speakers join some of those events like from the network, be able to talk about their experiences. They can join, have tickets, and so we have this kind of like almost combined approach, and I think that's been really, really useful in terms of like both finding community groups externally that we would want to partner with, but also making sure that people from the network can maybe join events and other community groups that we are working with in partnership. And so that kind of like combined and joint approach is definitely something that we'll be continuing with.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so I have two last questions. We're coming up to nearly the 30-minute mark. It's flown. So let me see. So two last questions. First of all, you've from Andela to CoderDojo and you observing, especially where you were, right? You're in a great hub for people watching. There's a large hub in Ireland called Dogpatch Labs, kind of like the epicenter of the technical and the startup community. What would the advice you would give? I'm hearing a bit of a playback, excuse me, to organizers of technical communities. So now things are gone, all things remote / hybrid, and all of the stuff that you're thinking about at a simplistic level. Is there any like little tips? If I was an organizer and I was like, all right, I'm going back to the grind now from tomorrow. I'm going to start my events next month. Any thoughts?
I think that piece that we talked about earlier of like, don't put too much pressure on your own shoulders is probably the biggest thing. Like, I think to kind of like know that you're going to continuously improve, know that it's going to be really strange to do these things again, even if it's something that you actually did a lot of originally. I think the second thing as well is like find other people to do that with you. And like, I think the more that I've been, the more that I've led communities, that's the biggest thing that we're trying to tell people is like, build people. Yeah, build people around you, build your network, try and get like the weight to be spread out a little bit. And, don't take everything on one person's shoulders. I think is just like a phenomenal thing for anything in life. Just don't do it yourself.
Life advice applies to organizing events. Yeah, okay.
But I think that's a big thing. And I think that's also something of like, we talked about that burnout piece. I think if you're coming back and you're trying to get something up and running regularly, think about how great it would be if you could go on holiday the next month, if you run a regular thing and you have someone who can step in and work with you on that, and we can kind of balance.
We find that a lot. I think you hit the nail on the head with kind of well articulated. I would have went in a different direction, but well articulated on like, just don't go it solo, because that actually compounds a lot of the problems that are people don't. Organizers well know like the amount of work that goes into it, like just a 1 hour event, all the speaker sponsors, venues, all the logistics. And so going solo, we've kind of see that
and sometimes you do it out of necessity, right? Because you're like, I've started this thing and now I'm on the road and like I'm here, and how do I find another person who wants to do this with me? And like very often it's you need to ask, and that can be a hard thing too. So putting it out to people who you're around like is the first thing to try and do it, but also completely understand whenever you end up like you're doing it all and you're checking through your list and you're trying to do your day job and whatever. But yeah.
Cool. Good answer. Totally agree with the going solo. So my last final question. From all that, the transition over to Andela, and again, just your observation on communities. What do you think is like, I was going to say what's next, what's now / next, right? It's all happening at the one time. What do you feel is, whether from the Andela perspective or just the Rosa perspective, what do you think is next for communities, right? So we've had, everyone understood how to kind of click into Meetup and build communities before, very easy. And, whether it's technical or startup communities all around the world, huge growth over the last number of years. And then COVID kind of burst the bubble on all of that, kind of made everyone rethink on things like capturing content, right? like we've a little quote internally. Can you imagine if Meetup had a captured content just in one category, like developers or tech over the past number of years? So people capturing content through to all of the other kind of the logistical challenges I mentioned before. Where do you see things going now with remote and hybrid and
Yeah, so I think there's like two aspects to that. One is the community and technical community side, and then the other is like a technical careers side. So for both, I think a big direction that like we have aligned to is that we can be globally connected, right? But we can also be locally based. And I think one of the big things with people like kind of moving to remote work is that they can get opportunities that they might have had in the big cities, and like being able to like take that back to their house, back to their hometown, wherever that might be. That might be like Lagos, it might be Belfast, right? And I think that kind of idea that we can all be connected globally, but from those bases, is something I think will continue to perpetuate. And I think that piece of how it links into events, right, is that you can get a global speaker. You can be more, I guess, equitable about who you're bringing in, right? You know, someone told me, and I couldn't find it, I was looking last night, but someone told me that they had more women join events when they've gone virtual than they ever would have in person. And I think that kind of stuff is like the accessibility of having either hybrid or virtual events, and how you can actually make your like lineup of speakers more diverse as well. Like if you're conscientious about that stuff, you can do it much better in this kind of globally connected, but you know, locally kind of familiar world. And I think that's something that as we kind of come out of this, that we'll understand like how to do the nuts and bolts of this. It won't be this big like hurdle to jump over to be doing virtual things or doing hybrid things. And I think it'll become a more natural place that things will become this kind of balancing act.
That's a huge one. You mentioned 2 points. I was actually going to leave it there, but you mentioned 2 points. I was just too interested. You mentioned effectively what I'd consider hubs, and you mentioned like the diverse side. We've been having chats internally about this as super interesting. Of, you know, the challenge with some of that ticking the diversity box for some speakers. They're the byproduct of their events is their network. Right, and sometimes people, and so we've looked at like, right, what is it that you can support with that, and whether the KPI, is there a KPI? Does the KPI sit for the organizer or larger the region? And that's some stuff that we're exploring. We haven't cracked it yet, but it's a pretty it's a pretty interesting one on how if you have a blank canvas now with all things gone offline, things getting online, eventually hybrid. Do you establish a KPI for the local region to tick the diversity and inclusivity, even the NGO or the social for good box? Why shouldn't that be integrated into the rebirth of new technical communities, right? And so, if so, what is it that you could do? That's a question we're asking ourselves quite a lot of. The other side was, and there's a question with this one, more about the hubs. So as you said, from Lagos to Belfast, do you see a different type of creation of local? Right, local was typically right for us in Europe, Dublin, Belfast, London, etc., larger cities. Now, as you know, from an Irish perspective, we'll speak in the Irish context. For other people, it's where I'm going to talk about kind of more rural, leaving Dublin and going to live in the sticks in Sligo or whatever like that. Are you guys thinking about that from the context of developers globally, and whether it's in African regions or elsewhere, about what, if you're doing that online, of course we get, but how their people are being a bit more distributed in non-typical local hubs?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to use a different example. So I've been doing a little bit of work with GrowRemote Ireland, and so they're a fantastic organization. Similarly, very like focused on this kind of like rural city divide, and the big thing, and it's also with Andela too, right, is infrastructure. How do we put in place the proper infrastructure to allow people to work remotely in each of these places? And there's also been a really interesting trend, right, as part of that community, is that and again globally, is that you have this mass resignation for people whose companies are making them go back into the office, and they're like, well, actually, I've like shifted my family to like maybe a little bit further than, you know, closer to my family roots or whatever, and I'm a little bit out of commuting distance now. Do I want to go in 3 days a week? Like that feels like a lot. Or I've made my work-life balance this way. And I think for me, it's really interesting because I think rural areas could really thrive if they throw their doors open to this, and a lot of them are. And there's a lot of people who have signed up to be like the Grow Remote chapters and lead that and open up, you know, co-working spaces, whether they're like, you know, like small offices that people can just like jump into.
Again, I look at a co-work space the same. It's a mechanism in it to enable connectivity of people based in that region, same as an event, kind of, to a certain extent.
Yeah, and you look towards a lot of like this is getting deeper into like economics and stuff, but like the general shift is towards like a 15-minute city, right? And it's like, how can you have everything that you need, local amenities, like a co-working space that like you become little clusters and neighborhoods, and it's less about this like giant city. It's more about like having a cluster effect of a lot of neighborhoods in one place. But you should have the same thing when you're in a rural area of like, you have access to all these things. And I do think that that's something that, you know what, like people are going to have their preferences, city or rural. But I do think that the shift to remote work makes that more of a choice and not just something that you have to do when you're in a specific career, whether that's tech, whether it's like finance, but whatever it might be, that you have to be in this kind of, be in that place and it's dictated to you. Like opportunity should be kind of more equally spread, and it shouldn't matter where you are.
Perfect. Great way to end the chat. First, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us.
Thank you.
Hopefully this was kind of well packaged for the community and event and meetup organizers we'll be chatting to over the next couple of weeks. For people listening, there's more content and all the information on rebuild-local.yard.live. There'll be more events there over the coming weeks. This will be uploaded to that site and to YouTube. We have a bunch of other speakers on it, leader speakers and local regions. Also, the last thing, if you are wanting to create your own Rebuild Local, get in touch. There's an application on the site.